Did you hear about the rodeo event in Moncks Corner this weekend? It drew in a big crowd, but it also drew in a lot of scrutiny for lack of social distancing.
One woman who was there asked our Carter Coyle to investigate how large events like that are allowed during a pandemic.
Your bull riders, they usually don't.
The Moncks Corner Pro Rodeo got a state exemption allowing the large event last Friday and Saturday by agreeing to certain COVID-19 safety requirements on its application. While there's no mask ordinance active in the town or the county right now, the Moncks Corner town administrator said the state exemption required the rodeo comply with social distancing and best practices from the CDC. The town application asked if a social distancing plan was in place and if masks would be required. Rodeo organizers answered yes to both.
It was not possible to socially distance. The bleachers were packed. People were sitting hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder.
Janet Cox says she's loved horses her whole life, but this was the first time she and her friend have been to a rodeo.
The whole experience was clouded by the lack of mask wearing. My guess was that there were 500 people there. There may have been more. I saw maybe 10 people wearing masks. So I was real concerned. We were just packed in there like sardines.
The event application was for 5,000 to 10,000 people. The website said tickets would be limited due to COVID-19. On Facebook, the night before the rodeo began, the organizers advertised there'd be 1,000 more tickets at the gate. Pictures from the event show a packed house.
Those photos show stunningly irresponsible misbehavior among participants and organizers.
We asked infectious disease specialist Dr. Robert Ball his opinion.
This kind of unmasked crowd demonstrates the misbehavior of folks who either don't care about their health or others' health or don't believe in public health science or both.
The rodeo was hosted on Berkeley County property, but the county says they're not responsible and simply rented out the space. When we asked further questions, they insisted we file a public records request. For 2 days now, I've been trying to get a hold of the people who organized the rodeo. I've texted, emailed, and called, left voicemails. So far, no one's gotten back to me to answer to these concerns. The Moncks Corner Police Department did tell us that 2 off-duty officers were hired for security at the event, but it's still unclear who, if anyone, is in charge of enforcing the COVID policies after these large events are approved.
I believe when somebody applies to hold an event like that, they need to check up on these people and make sure that they are doing what they say they were going to do and be fined if they're not.
We also saw this live video on the rodeo Facebook page. Miss Rodeo USA visiting Berkeley Middle School, promoting the event during lunchtime and passing out autographed headshots to the kids. But visitors are currently not allowed in Berkeley County schools. The Berkeley County School District said, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. This was not a district authorized visit. This matter is being addressed at the appropriate level." The video has now been removed from the rodeo Facebook page. Janet worries we'll see spikes in COVID numbers after events like this with large unmasked crowds.
There's people's lives at risk. And I know there's still people out there who believe it's a farce, and I don't understand that with over 200,000 people dead.
DHEC told us in part it encourages anyone who does choose to participate in large gatherings to get tested so they can know their COVID status. In Moncks Corner, Carter Coyle, Live 5 News.
While South Carolina has long been a conservative or red state, politically speaking, experts say a color change is coming and Charleston could be the place to lead it.
Our Lillian Donahue breaks down how growth in the Low Country could lead to a political shift in the years to come.
Last year, the Tri-County, Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester counties grew by an average of 38 people every day.
I recently moved to South Carolina about 2 years ago from Connecticut. Living downtown, we're noticing that a lot of people are moving from New York and Pennsylvania, so a lot of people coming in from the north.
Over the past decade, Census Bureau data estimates that Berkeley County has grown the largest by 28%, and then next Dorchester by 20%, and finally Charleston by around 18%. The biggest driver is employment at places like Volvo, Mercedes, Boeing, and others.
This demand for labor, which is not in the existing labor force, is really pulling people who are more likely college educated, also much, much younger. And the growth development, what we see in Charleston is radically different from what we would see in a place like Myrtle Beach or Hilton Head, which is a completely different economic configuration.
That new group of people calling the Palmetto State home could not only change the economic landscape, but the political one as well.
Down here in Charleston, it used to be an all-red county, all-red district.
We are starting to see fingerprint evidence of a change in voting trends in metropolitan areas.
There's certainly probably a bit more of a purple county, Charleston especially. We've had a good influx of people from out of the state, and with that comes new voting patterns.
Dr. Karen Amira, an assistant professor of political science at the College of Charleston, says this was seen in the 1st Congressional District, which includes the Lowcountry coastline and parts of Charleston, where Democrat Joe Cunningham narrowly took a congressional seat in 2018 that was held by a Republican for decades.
You have people moving in from places like New York or out of state, plus you have students that are sticking around after college. It could do something to transform the political landscape in the area.
But she also says any political shift on a statewide scale won't be seen for years, and Democratic runners still face an uphill battle when running against longtime Republican strongholds in the state.
But this is still a fairly Republican state. In fact, the gap between Republicans and Democrats, if you look at the Gallup polls over the last 10, 12 years, since 2008, 2009, that gap has widened.
But Clemson researchers say a shift will come as long as industry continues to draw outside talent in.
The idea of regions which have historically voted one direction are now changing, which is bringing us to a very important kind of political reality. History doesn't vote, people do. And so as the composition of these communities are changing, voting trends are changing. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Charleston.
Currently, the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce reports around 30,000 people are employed across the Tri-County for manufacturing alone. Reporting in Charleston, Lillian Donahue, Live 5 News.
Researchers say that it is unlikely that you'll see a stark political change during this year's election, rather the shift taking place over the next 5 to 10 years.
Right now, the state agency that serves people with disabilities and special needs in South Carolina is meeting behind closed doors. They're talking about their search for a new state director after they fired their previous one earlier this year. As Carter Coyle tells us, while the termination seems sudden, it was all planned in emails.
Our State Department of Disabilities and Special Needs serves thousands of people with intellectual disabilities. DDSN runs the Coastal Center in Somerville, where we investigated a series of COVID-19 outbreaks last year. And that's where we first spoke with Mary Poole, the state director at the time.
And you can work behind a computer screen to give somebody a bath or feed them their dinner.
During a February board meeting, Poole seemingly did not know she was about to be fired.
So we'll be sending that out next week. I don't like to send out really big memos on Fridays.
But just a few hours later in the same meeting, this happened.
I move that Mary Poole be removed as director from DDSN and removed from service as an employee of DDSN immediately.
Commissioners voted 5-1 to fire Poole after less than 2.5 years on the job. They later accused her of mishandling an executive-level sexual harassment matter, but still refused to tell us or the public exactly why they fired Poole. At the time, Poole's firing in that meeting seemed to come out of nowhere. But Live 5 Investigates obtained hundreds of pages of internal documents, and they revealed that there was a whole plan for Poole's firing that day, all outlined through emails. And the documents show Mary Poole and another administrator were not getting along. This emailed plan for an executive session appears to have been shared among 4 of 6 commissioners. It plans that in the meeting they'll ask Chairman Gary Limmel to say what he knew about sexual harassment and sexual discrimination investigations in the executive suite and when he knew it. It also brings up this list of 5 concerns raised about Poole last winter by DDSN Internal Audit Director Kevin Jacoby. He accused Poole of breaking policies. Poole fired back February 12th, saying that Jacoby had extreme bias and had a goal to oust the state director, her. That same day, Jacoby was disciplined, and just 6 days later, Poole was fired. The plan accused her of having a serious lack of leadership ability, but did not go into any detail about the mishandling of those sexual harassment allegations. Now, Poole tells us in an email that she was not expecting to be fired that day. She says she handled personnel matters appropriately and didn't know this firing plan existed, calling it false and concerning. We've asked for interviews with Jacoby, the agency's interim director, the commissioners, but a spokesperson told us that they were not going to agree to interview because this story is about, quote, petty squabbles and is not newsworthy. Poole disagreed, telling us she thinks what happened here is in the public interest. In the newsroom, I'm Carter Coyle.
Right now at 7, South Carolina lawmakers considering a bill that would change the way many of the state's students learn U.S. history. If passed, the new curriculum would be based partly on former President Donald Trump's 1776 Commission report. Rob Way tells us how some worry it's putting too much politics inside the classroom.
All South Carolina public middle and high school students could soon be required to learn the history of the United States founding every year in a way that's consistent with former President Donald Trump's 1776 Commission report. State Senator Dwight Loftus from Greenville sponsored the legislation, calling it the Restore America's Foundation Act.
We have in today's society, I think, a lot of disrespect for the flag, for our national anthem and that sort of thing, and a knowledge of where we came from and why our forefathers did what they did. I think it's important that we know.
The bill is now in the hands of the Senate Education Committee. If passed, it would require a minimum of 30 hours of classroom instruction in United States history every year from 6th to 12th grade. The topics range from the American Revolution to the country's political philosophy. It also requires the state superintendent of education to review and prescribe suitable texts and online materials aligned with the principles and concepts of the January report of the 1776 Commission. This commission, which included no professional historians, was created by then-President Trump last September, and it released this report in January, aiming to promote a patriotic education in schools. The Trump White House's website calls the report a definitive chronicle of the American founding. Vernon Burton, a professor of history at Clemson University, disagrees.
The 1776 project confuses nationalism with patriotism, and there's a real difference there. And I think it'd be damaging for us as a country not to face up to say that we have problems. We have had problems. We're in problems now with this kind of legislation itself. It introduces more problems and more politics. It is telling people how to think, not to think.
The legislation is also getting pushback from Albert Robertson, the president of the state's Council for the Social Studies and the coordinator of social studies for Lexington County School District 1.
Our goal is the same here. We want to make sure that students love this nation. We want students to understand that this political experiment that is America is a wonderful thing. But we also have to understand that we're not flawless in our endeavors.
He adds a lot of the material recommended in the bill is already built into South Carolina's United States history curriculum, and the legislation's requirements may put a burden on teachers who are already trying to cover all their other required material.
There are specific allusions to United States history facts and events in, say, a world history class or in a geography class, but the thought to add the same content every single year for 30 hours a year it's going to be problematic.
The 1776 report claims the most common charge leveled against the nation's founders is they were hypocrites who didn't believe in their stated principles because they allowed slavery to continue in the Constitution. This charge is untrue, the report claims, adding it has done enormous damage, especially in recent years, with a devastating effect on our civic unity and social fabric.
Slavery was not the proper thing to do. It is slavery, and it's unfair to people who are enslaved. Going back to Egypt when they enslaved the Jewish people there. And we've always had slavery. Don't approve of it, never have. But I think it's good to know the good and the bad. That's what we learn from history.
Loftus says his initial focus of the bill was more on the founding documents, not entirely on the 1776 report. Burton says he's confused why the report is in there at all.
I have no idea why it's in there except for political and for the culture wars reasons. It makes no sense. It really doesn't.
State Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman, who would be charged with implementing some of these requirements, tells me she fully supports the legislation. She says most of the concepts listed in the report and the bill are already built into the state standards.
I understand that we need to be prepared to teach history accurately. So we're always working with our teachers to make sure that they have the tools, the resources that they need. South Carolina has such a rich history, but obviously there's some things that there were some dark times, and those need to be taught accurately, and our students need to be able to see both sides of issues.
Spearman says the state's Department of Education is reviewing the document and working to see if 30 additional hours of instruction would be needed, seeing that the standards already include many of the report's lessons.
I don't foresee that it will be an undue burden on any teacher.
I regret the fact that this seemingly always comes to the slavery issue, which I don't agree with. I think it was bad, but I think we can learn from it. But I want appreciation for not only the sacrifices, but the mindset, the knowledge, the wisdom to create the laws that we've had that has protected us and given us our freedom for these many years. That's the key to this.
If the bill passes, a report detailing the state superintendent's process and conclusions would need to be submitted to the Senate and House Education Committees by mid-October. In Columbia, I'm Rob Way.
The president of a prison workers union, along with families across the country, are demanding action for the federal prison in Williamsburg County to stop a coronavirus outbreak. Live 5 Investigates first brought you this story. Lillian Donahue reports the latest numbers inside and what some say needs to be done now.
They should be letting families know what's going on, and we should not be having to get it from outside sources.
Janet Nesbitt lives in North Carolina, but her son is locked up in a prison right here in the Low Country. She called Live 5 Investigates after seeing our story last month about the COVID-19 cases at FCI Williamsburg.
I want a full report on what's going on with my son. Other families need to know what's going on with their family members, and not that they're just okay.
The Federal Bureau of Prisons reported 104 confirmed active coronavirus cases on Monday, among the more than 1,300 inmates here. Today, the agency says that active number is down to 38, with 89 inmates recovered.
He did end up catching COVID.
Marshall Jenkins from Indiana says his father is one of them.
We had no clue as the family until he called us on December 22nd and said, "Hey, I've tested positive for COVID."
The local union president, who represents the majority of those who do work at the facility, says that he believes the outbreak actually ramped up after they changed their COVID-19 screening protocols from outside to inside their lobby.
They made some changes on the process of what we were doing, and being from those changes, that allowed COVID to actually walk into the institution.
Pinckney says he's working with the medical staff to contain and lower the numbers at the prison.
The institution overall health of our inmate population as well right now, but some of the staff are not.
Jenkins says there should be more open communication between the facility and families.
He is part of that extreme high risk, and it seems he's getting better now, which is great. But it could have very well taken a very bad turn.
But for now, he says the few phone calls from his father are the only way he gets information from inside. Reporting in Williamsburg County, Lillian Donahue, Live 5 News.
Now, we have reached out to the Federal Bureau of Prisons earlier today. They have not gotten back to us so far.